I want to thank Bombardier for their keynote sponsorship. Before we get started, let's hear a quick message from the team at Bombardier. Thanks again to Bombardier, our diamond sponsor, for supporting our keynote presentation. Just before I turn the screen over for the Business Aviation Outlook, I want to tell you a bit about our presenter, Rollie Vincent, president of Rollie Vincent Associates, LLC, and creator-director of JetNet IQ. This is Rollie's fourth time addressing the CBAA. Always one of our most popular and knowledgeable speakers, this year more than ever, we can all benefit from his deep insights and projections for the future. Rollie's background is exceptional. With an aviation career that spans over 35 years, beginning at ICAO, Rollie has served as a trusted consultant and at Textron, Bombardier, and ICAO. He was Vice President of Strategy and Business Development at Cessna Aircraft, Director of Marketing, Strategy and Business Development at FlexJet, Director of Strategy and Communications at Learjet, and Director of International Airline Analysis at Bombardier. A private pilot, Rollie earned a BA and MA in Economic Geography and an MBA in International Business and Marketing in his hometown in Montreal from McGill University. His understanding of the Canadian market in particular is unparalleled, and we're grateful he agreed to be part of our online event. Thanks to you, Rollie, and a reminder to those in attendance that I will monitor the chat for any questions that you may have at the conclusion of Rollie's presentation.
Anthony, thank you so much. It's great to be with you again. Is it really the fourth time? Thank you for your invitation. Thanks to the board. Thanks to James. Thanks to Bombardier for the keynote sponsorship as well. Bombardier has been a great company to me, both as an employer and also as a customer over the years. We really appreciate you. Thanks again to all of you for your time today. We have some information I want to share with you. And really, it has a lot of Canadian focus on it, as you'd hope and expect. So we're glad to share that with you. It's very up to date as well. Anthony has a copy now of everything I'm going to share with you. So don't worry if you miss a data point or something like that. We're kind of data geeks, I'll be honest. We love data. We love aviation data and integrating that with all kinds of other insights. We're here to share with you really the state of the market. Focused on things like challenges and opportunities. I think we're all aware of some of the challenges. We'll go into that in a little bit, but also focus on the opportunities. If you have any questions, I'll be taking them, and I'll leave time at the end of this presentation for them. And I'm sure Anthony can help a little bit with quarterbacking all of that. Thanks, Anthony. Really appreciate it. And also just to the CBAA team, just being so easy to work with and so friendly and helpful all the time. So here in front of you is really just the opening screen, if you like. We're going to talk around opportunities and challenges specifically for business aviation in this post-COVID world with a Canadian focus. I've lived in the US now for a bunch of years, but I'm from Canada originally. Was back in Canada, I think 7 times in 2019. And then in 2020, for the first time in my life, back to the country. Okay, just a quick outline, what we're going to talk around. Really the fleet, we're going to start with the fleet. What's going on in the Canadian fleet and put it in a perspective, an international perspective. And then from there, we'll transition and look at the pre-owned market. Why the pre-owned market? I've mentioned this in years past, but this is really the heartbeat of this industry. There's a lot more activity, a lot more really a quick sort of, we can get a quick capture as to what's going on in the industry by looking at pre-owned markets. We'll also look at the new markets, you know, the airplane factory deliveries, as they're coming in for this year so far on a worldwide basis. For those who know me and know some of our work, you may be aware that we do a survey, a worldwide survey of aircraft owners and operators. We are now in our 11th year of doing these surveys, and there are almost 140 countries reporting to us now, really the state of the markets internationally. Around 60% of those come from the US, because that's where around 60% of the fleet resides. But we have a really nice Canadian contingent reporting to us, around 100 people, 100 companies, organizations on an annualized basis. We'll share with you some of those results. I think there's some really good insights there, and I think some very optimistic insights that you'll see. We'll then end with just a quick summary of something called the JetNet IQ Summit. Once a year, we bring leaders together from around the industry, and we share insights, we share time together, and it'll be in person. This is a decision we took around 12 weeks ago, and we'll be in New York at the JFK airport, and we'll talk around that in a little bit, but we will be in person in 21. Okay, big picture, big picture. Where is Canada in the grand scheme of things? And you can see here on the left, I guess that's the left side of your screen, you can see the fleet mix and the way it distributes around the world. Business jets, around 2%, just a little over 2% of the fleet of business jets today. There's around 22,800 aircraft in the world, about 2.3% are in Canada. Now, if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see on the turboprop side, Canada represents around 5% of the world fleet of turboprops. Interestingly, and this we don't see in many parts of the world, turboprops are actually the largest sector of the industry for business aviation, at least the way they're counted through our partner JetNet. We'll get into that in a little bit, but it's an interesting dynamic. I mean, turboprops are they can be used for so many different purposes, and Canadians have embraced the turboprop product line in a big way. Okay, let's look at the jet fleet for just a minute. Again, as of the JetNet database, when we look at that, going back at, let's say, at the end of Q1 this year, so March 31, 2021, we counted 532 business jets in the Canadian fleet. That's been growing somewhat slowly, as we know. We've been through a little bit of a challenging year last year. That's a kind way to put it. And we put things here in perspective. As you look at this chart, the green line that snakes across the screen here, these are the GDP, or the economic growth rates expected for 2021 in these countries. And anything typically around 3% growth on an annualized basis is considered pretty robust. Now, we had a tough year last year. Most national economies were actually in recession. So coming out of a recession, you're going to see growth rates that are typically pretty substantial. Now, we're happy to see in the case of Canada and other countries that we're seeing 5% GDP growth expected. At least this is according to some of the sources we looked at recently. So we'll see where it ends up, but it's a very nice recovery trajectory. Now, in the US market, again, the heights of these blue bars you see on the screen, this is the number of business jets that are based in these countries. These are the top 20 countries in the world. So you get some perspective as to how unbalanced this marketplace is, how it's so concentrated in North America. Actually, US, Canada, and Mexico together, I think it's almost 75% of the business jet fleet sits just in the the NAFTA. I know we don't necessarily call it NAFTA anymore, but in that part of the world, it's impressive. And if you look at growth rates, economic growth rates expected this year, it's going to be strong. We're already feeling it. I live in Texas, in North Texas. The economy here is strong. Construction is underway. There's an enthusiasm that we hope that the rest of the world is also coming along the same path with us. There is, as you may know, some successes, very slow start here in the US when it came to vaccination rates, but really in March, April of this year, the COVID vaccines were widely distributed. And my wife and I, we drove 3 hours to get ours. We were just so anxious and pleased to be able to do that. So in Canada, I know the first vaccine distributions, the initial jab, if you like, that went really well. Canada's done very well in that area. And now second jabs, if that's required, are coming. And I think you'll see a really nice ramp up, both in terms of the way people feel, the way policymakers are framing that situation. And then, of course, the opening of the borders. The U.S.-Canada border, we're very hopeful that that will be coming very shortly, and maybe even this month, with the U.S. administration potentially taking the initiative and just opening the U.S. side up to Canada. We believe, we hope that's happening this month on the 22nd. We'll see. We are forecasters, and we're pretty accurate on the short term. So I would say bet on that one. Now, will that encourage Canada to do the same? Absolutely. Whether that's an order in council or whatever is required at the federal level, we do see a lot of opportunity short term, certainly this year, for that border to be opened. And we hope maybe by August that we're seeing some normalcy in that transportation relationship. It's interesting to us how there's different, well, I'll call them loopholes, because if you fly in or you drive in, it's a very different situation, as you know. And it's just the quarantine issue is massive, and it's stopping travel. I was talking to a very large organization, let's just call them Pfizer, and they typically fly into Canada with some of their most senior medical experts, and that's normally a 10-minute flight plan into Pearson out of West Trenton, New Jersey. They were telling us it's 3 weeks to get that authorization and to get the right people on site into, in that case, Toronto Pearson. That's crazy. That's stopping travel. That's stopping utilization. And that's the cap that we have to remove. So I guess the good news on this screen, back to the screen here, is very robust growth expected, and it's already happening this year. We're halfway through the year. In 2 weeks, who would have thought we'd all be watching hockey and the Stanley Cup playoffs in June and July on Canada Day? I just, it's amazing. Go Habs go, by the way. Here we are. This is the economic situation overlaying the fleet. So hopefully you're getting some takeaways from that. Okay, a little bit more on the Canadian situation specifically. Textron Aviation and Bombardier are the lead players when it comes to who's supplying aircraft to your owner-operator community. You see some of the numbers here. This is through the end of June, actually mid-June, I should say, mid-June, just the other day on the JetNet system. So when we talk about Textron Aviation, clearly that's Cessna Citation, that's the Cessna Caravans, that's the Beech King Airs, etc. Those are the three primary players, as you know. Bombardier has a very well-distributed fleet across, Learjet, Challenger, and Global, with quite a bit of interest in the higher end product lines here, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you see the OEMs that are represented in Canada. Pilatus is doing very well. This is a company not many people necessarily have on their bright radar screen, but they have both a turboprop PC-12 and a PC-24 light jet, and they're making moves and noise in the industry for sure. Okay, I'll just walk through this quickly, and then please we'll open it up for questions. I'm sure you'll have some. When we look at by province and territory, maybe this isn't a surprise to any of you, but it's always interesting to see the up-to-date data. This is through June 15th, according to JetNet. And again, we look at it in terms of where the aircraft are based, where they're typically flown from in the morning, if you like. Ontario, Alberta, Quebec, of course, the primary sources, or at least bases for these aircraft. No big surprise there. But when it comes to policy, when it comes to talking to policymakers, these sorts of things are important to know. The fleet is well distributed, as you can imagine. Here's another interesting way to look at the fleet, and in terms of how is it distributed across size categories. What we have stacked here at the top, it looks a little bit like one of those Arctic sort of waypoints, I guess, the statues that you see in the territories, maybe along the pathways. But at the top of the market, very large cabin, long-range aircraft, all the way down to maybe more in a pyramidical shape, down to the bottom, the baseline, the turboprop aircraft. In some cases, those are converted aircraft from the good old days, the de Havillands, early de Havillands, and other aircraft. So you see that sort of distribution. I was just looking at this for the for the Middle East the other day, and for Saudi Arabia in particular, for a client, and the actual distribution was almost the opposite. So very high-end, large cabin airplanes and almost nothing underneath. We see that as well in Russia and a few other of these parts of the world, which are where you see a strong, very strong element of or a small element of the population that has most of the wealth. And in a more distributed wealth situation like Canada, you see more what we'll call a normal distribution. Okay, one of the interesting things, and we'll show it to you a little bit later in this slide deck, is what are people in Canada thinking of buying next? We actually have data on that. We asked the owner-operator community, okay, of all of the aircraft that are out there, whether it's a new or pre-owned, and we actually check on that as well. What is that one airplane that you're interested in buying next? And we'll share that with you in a few slides. But just remember this distribution, and then we'll see it. What are people thinking of buying next? Wayne Gretzky, of course, famous for talking around. He didn't want to know where the game was being played, but where it was going to be played, and that's really what we're talking about here. Where is the puck going to be? Where is this game going to be? And I'll give you a hint: it's moving up market. Okay, we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. Okay, here is again looking at this Canadian fleet, a very significant fleet, one of the biggest in the world, in the top 5, I believe, in the world. This is combining the business jet and turboprop fleets together, and you see, the year of delivery when those aircraft were produced. They're typically produced and delivered in the same year, not always, but in most cases, those dates are pretty much lined up. So you see where we've been, if you like, where we were, as Anthony would like to describe it as, and maybe where we're going. We'll talk around that a little bit. One of the interesting things, though, has been the last few years, there's been some sluggishness in both intake of aircraft in Canada, but also in terms of, I think, overall sentiment, and certainly the business sentiment. We looked at that, especially, I guess, end of 18, beginning of 19. Again, we'll talk around some data in a second here, but we saw some sluggishness in Canada, both maybe it was Keystone, maybe it was crude oil prices. Certainly Alberta was reeling a little bit with some of the issues over and across the border trying to get that pipeline built. So we don't know if that was generally what was going on and many other things, but we saw a bit of a setback. I think that's affecting, of course, oil patch demand, but also beyond that, maybe more generally. Oil prices have been, especially for crude oil, were at an all-time low, or at least recent all-time low, back in, I think, end 18. Now, here's some interesting information. When you look at the Canadian fleet, and this is again jets and turboprops, only 5.5% of that fleet is currently listed as for sale. Now, that's a listing on the JetNet service, which is a free, anybody can access it and put their information out there. So we think this is pretty accurate. There's always going to be more airplanes that are kind of what we call off market, which is essentially, yeah, they're available for sale at the right price, like anything in the world is probably available for sale at the right price. But given what we see on our listing services, if you like, only 5.5% of the fleet's for sale. Now, how does that compare historically? What does that look like? Is that good, bad, ugly? This is the tightest market we've ever seen for pre-owned aircraft, ever. Did I say ever? Ever. We're coming out of a recession. We're coming out of a worldwide pandemic situation, and we see the tightest pre-owned market we've ever seen. This is completely opposite from where we were 12 years ago, 11 years ago, coming out of the global financial crisis, where we went into this situation where we had all kinds of inventory, up to 18, 19% of the fleet worldwide was available. Prices were falling, values were falling. Boards of directors were saying, get rid of the airplane. I don't want that thing. I don't want to be seen with that aircraft, whatever it was. All of these things were going on. And then we went into this very slow transaction world. Now, if you were building big cabin airplanes like Bombardier or Gulfstream, you probably didn't feel it as much at that end of the market 12 years ago. But you really felt it at the lower end of the market, mid-size and lower, and certainly in turboprops. So we're looking at a very different situation today. Today we have very little inventory for sale that's young, almost none that's young, and only 5.5% of the entire fleet. And you saw the distribution of the age before. So that's good news in many ways if you're interested in valuations of airplanes and them being either stable or maybe picking up a little bit, or if you're the manufacturer and you're saying, well, rather than buy that one airplane out there in the last 5 years that's even available, why don't you come to my factory and my completion center, and we'll spec out an all new airplane. It'll have the warranty and the fine leather aromas as you walk in, and the latest LED and the latest pure air and everything else that a new aircraft can deliver. So we're seeing that as kind of a good news story for the OEMs. Now, on the other side of things, we're having, and we'll talk around some supply chain issues that the factories are facing. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Here's giving a little historical perspective. Now, this is by size category. So we break up the airplanes into various categories here by size, and we can define those for you if you like, just let us know. But essentially what we're seeing, again, big picture, this goes back to just after the global financial crisis, when spikes of inventory were in just about every segment. And then we saw the slow, long decline. Really, the recovery that we saw coming out of the global financial crisis was almost 10 years, 9 or 10 years. The recovery that we're seeing out of this recession, of this crisis, the COVID crisis, is V-shaped. It's a very quick, sharp down and a very quick, sharp back up. Not all the way back up, however, and we'll watch that. That last little bit is impacted by things like quarantines. It's impacted by things like, environmental issues, but also social issues around really people's feelings about optimism and the future and what's happened to, globalism and internationalism and all the other things we thought we were believing in. Pre-owned markets, again, let's look at some of these details. This is the number of aircraft this is jets here, pre-owned jets that are either selling or that are out on the market. So you can see some of the dynamics I mentioned. If you go back on the screen here, I'll see if I can point with my, here we go. The blue here, this is the number of aircraft that are transacting. And now typically pre-owned transactions are going to run around 3 to 4 times the volume. So 3 to 4x the volume of aircraft are moved in the pre-owned market than in the new market in a typical year. Again, another reason we look at them, there's a lot of data to analyze here and we can see trends pretty quickly, okay? We don't have to wait for the OEMs to report some of this stuff. And when we look at inventory, this is the number of aircraft that are listed for sale. And when we had the recession starting in December of 07 in the US and then worldwide really in 08, 09, look what happened. Inventory spiked, right? A lot of airplanes on the market. So prices softened, everybody ran away and nobody wanted to transact. And what happened to transactions? Exactly that, they dropped. And here's a long, slow rebuild of transactions over the years. And look at this, in 2018, we had a very strong, 2019, et cetera. We had a very strong periods of transactions. We've seen really the trends have been going opposite where we were. Look, inventory was high, now it's low. Transactions were low, now they're high. It's an upside down world. That's what happens when a black swan comes and ingests itself into your engine at 51,000 feet. Inventory, just looking at it the other day, worldwide, 6.4% of the jets are available for sale, 6.4. If you recall a slide we just had, Canada, 5.5. So the Canadian market, which is in strong recovery mode as far as we can see, is already tighter than the overall market for the fleet. Transactions, just looking at the first few months of the year, the first 4 months, where the data have settled down and we can have pretty good confidence in them. Transactions on a volume basis, it's the number of jets being moved, sold, retail, or leased. It's up 36%. That's a worldwide number. Of course, some of this activity very concentrated particularly in the US. Let's look at that a little bit in terms of the transactions again. Transactions, again, we're seeing up some pretty big numbers here. Days on market as well. Days on market, when we think of, let's say, a real estate market, you might think, how long does it take to sell my house? Well, in this case, we're looking at jets around 250, 260 days in some cases to sell an airplane. It's faster than we'd seen in prior years, okay? So when something's out there, when it's for sale, when it's fairly fresh, the market is almost bidding up these aircraft, kind of like we're seeing in Toronto and Vancouver real estate. Not the craziness of that, but we are seeing strength in the market. Now let's look at the new business jet deliveries. This is something that's coming in, and we can record them from the GAMA organization. That's the General Aviation Manufacturers Association. They come in quarterly, and they're usually kind of after the fact. We have to sort of understand where we were. Great data, but they come in a little late. In our JetNet system, we can actually track transaction paperwork, whether the aircraft have been registered or not, put on a registry, and what the paperwork looks like. According to that, we see around 197 aircraft have been transacted through, I guess, mid-year, June 14, okay? And what's interesting, and again, thanks to our keynote sponsor, Bombardier, they're having a good year so far, especially relative to their peers, based on the data that we're gathering and looking at really every day, every hour. They're doing quite well, and you can see some of the numbers here. And these are worldwide. Turboprops, as you know, as I mentioned earlier, the turboprops are actually a bigger segment in Canada in your fleet than they are in the world. Typically, you know, jets are, I think worldwide jets is around, what is it, 22,000, and turboprops around 15,000. That's kind of the mix worldwide. And in Canada, actually, more turboprops than jets, according to our metrics anyway. Right now, there's 86 deliveries through, I think, yesterday or the day before in the JetNet system. A little bit of a slow start, as expected, though. Textron Aviation with Beechcraft and certainly Caravan leading the pack, as they typically do, followed by Pilatus, a perennial favorite, and certainly in Canada. Here's a little forecast actually for you. Everyone asks us, okay, where's this market going? We try to do our best to understand where we are, where we've been, where we are, but also where we're going. We think the jet delivery situation is going to be up around 10.5% year over year. What did I just say? The number of deliveries of new business jets out of factories, whether they're from Montreal or Savannah or somewhere else, we think that number is going to be up this year. It'll be up around 10.5%. And the way we measure it, at least across these OEMs, these manufacturers, that'll be just over 700 jets. Now, we had a bit of a slow start. You might have noticed a couple of slides ago, I mentioned the business jet deliveries. This in the first, you know, almost 6 months of the year, we had only 197 deliveries. Now, part of that is just the fact that we look for transaction paperwork in JetNet to make sure that we know what happened and where that airplane's going, who bought it, who sold it, etc. In this case, an OEM, of course. We then track that, record it, and put it in our system. So our data does lag a little bit. We typically see in the second half of the year, around 60% of business jets are delivered in the second half of the year versus the first. So that 197 number I shared with you, that was through mid-June. It'll go up quite a bit as we get towards the end of the quarter. OEMs are very keen to make sure that deliveries happen within that financial quarter. And so we always see the ramp in the last month of each quarter, okay? And the big ramp is in Q4 every year, which is, depending on who you are, Bombardier is very disciplined about this, others not so much. We see between 38 and 55% of total output happening in Q4 of a year. Now, if you're interested in quality and you know, making sure the customer is delighted, if you're delivering half your product in a very short time of the year, it does put strain on the system. And we can talk about that offline. That's kind of an interesting topic. Okay, our surveys. I mentioned we do a survey, and it goes to the worldwide community of owners and operators. This is our thinking 11 years ago when we decided to do this, was to take customer voices and amplify them. Why? Because, you know, if someone owns and operates one airplane in Manitoba or two in Alberta, maybe they don't feel in the grand scheme of things that their voice is important to those who build, design, service, fuel, train our industry, okay? And yet each of their voices collectively is vital to amplify what we like to think of as amplifying. So we take this set of, sample, if you like, of the population, and we speak to them through our survey. It's a multilingual survey. It's password protected. You cannot find this survey online like some. You have to be invited to this survey, and you have to be invited with a password. And that password allows us to know exactly who's responding. And then we can do a lot of analytics without revealing any identities or any privileged information that the individual corporation or entity did not want revealed. Of course, we aggregate everything. So big picture, we try to reach 500 owners and operators every 90 days from around 50 countries or more. And we've done this successfully for 11 years. No one else has this information. This is proprietary, but available as well to subscribers. So right now, 20,000, we're coming up on 21,000 opinions. Now, these surveys are not 2 questions either. They're substantial surveys. Now, who's answering our surveys? I just mentioned we try to get 500 folks These are owners and operators. These are people who fly either in the back or maybe in the front of the airplane, but they own and operate fixed wing turbine airplanes. 500 or so folks in Q1 survey, 743 job titles. These are busy people, sometimes with more than one job. But it's interesting when you look at some of these numbers and some of these individual demographics, we can then parse some of this information. And we just look at the C-suite, for example, and see how they feel versus, let's say, the rest of the community. One really interesting thing is here, around 1/3 of our respondents actually made the last airplane purchase decision. That's what they say. We tend to believe them. And we can then analyze that group as well. Okay, this is maybe one of the more important slides I'm going to share with you. This is a pendulum. Think of a pendulum. I've shared this with you, I think, in years past. We have never seen the pendulum so positively swinging as it is right now. This is a worldwide, and the statement is there in front of you. This is what we ask the owner-operator community of fixed-wing turbine airplanes worldwide. How do you describe current market conditions for business aviation? You know, are things, you know, we haven't reached the low point in this cycle? Are we kind of in the flat period of this cycle, or are things looking up? And this this number here, 70%, is as high as we've ever measured. What's really interesting is that this is about as low as it gets right now. So people do believe generally that we've passed the worst of this, and our survey is still in progress. We're around 83% complete right now. So this is almost real time. This survey is our Q2 survey. It's in progress. It doesn't get any more current than this data. Now let's look at what we call net optimism. That prior slide, we looked at, I'll go back quickly, what I'm gonna say, I won't go backwards. We have the positives, the blue, and the negatives, the red, if you like. We even those out, and what do we come up with? Net optimism. That's the higher this chart, the more optimistic people are feeling. And if you look at it, where we have been, Anthony asked, hey, let's look at where we've been, you know. We're at -43. The scale here is -100 to +100. And where are we now? It's the highest we have ever measured. We looked at this and other factors a few weeks ago. We've actually increased our forecast for the industry more than we've ever increased it on a quarter-by-quarter basis. I'll say that again. We've just increased our forecast of demand for our industry going forward, the most we've ever done in a quarter-by-quarter basis. Not just based on this, but this is an important input. Now let's look at some of the geography of that net sentiment. We just saw it in terms of vertical bars. Now we smooth it out and you show it on a line basis. Now here, because we have around 100 respondents per year in Canada, all we want to do to be fair and to be statistically clear that we're not showing small sample sizes here, we smooth it out and show it over a 2-quarter rolling average. So these are about 50 Canadian owners and operators on that red line, okay? And again, the higher the line, the more optimistic they're feeling. We see the swoon in the mood here, which reflects other things that were going on, but maybe a little bit more starkly in Canada. We also see a pickup in mood here, and now a little bit of a flattening. We think that with the vaccination rates that you're starting to see accelerate, that'll really pick up. Canada's done very well in terms of the fatality numbers. I mean, relative to the US, 600,000 Americans have died in this pandemic from COVID, and Canada, I think it was 26,000. I mean, that number is crazy different. And I know it's discouraging to feel that, there's no freedoms and you aren't breaking out of the cocoon you're in, but it's the results that you've actually experienced are dramatically better than what we see here in the US. Okay, a couple quick slides here to summarize some of the key things that we're hearing from the owner-operator community. What is it's all around the rebound and picking up on the rebound. The big opportunity Anthony asked me to think around is really capturing post-COVID, the recovery period of post-COVID. People have been experiencing business aviation for the first time. Charter and fractional demand is off the charts, and I'm sure you're feeling it. And James, I know, a good friend of mine, hopefully, I know he's feeling this, good demand, but what we need to see is the opening of that north-south corridor to allow people to go where they need and want to go. That's coming, and I think it's coming sooner than a lot of people think. Maybe in August, let's hope. So capturing that opportunity here, we're asking people, what's, economically, what do you think? This is the owner operator community. Do you believe that the global economy is going to get back to where we were in 21? And blue means yes. Blue means yes. And you can see the numbers here, both for North America, where optimism is considerably higher. That's Canada, US data on the left. And on the right, Europe, which has been more, I think, just more hesitant about the recovery. Okay, another thing I think it's very important is, in-person events. We heard that, I think Anthony made a statement about 2022 is going to happen, right? An in-person event. And I look forward to being there and joining you again. In-person event, we made a bold decision. I mean, the data is not pure here. We're taking some chances getting together, but we think in-person events are coming. But here, if you look at, you have to now switch your head a little bit. Red means I disagree with that statement. And the statement is, we are hesitant to attend an event in the second half. Red means, you know what? No, it's a double negative. I hate double negatives, but we are hesitant. No, that means yes, right? So North America is ready to get back together. That's what this slide tells us. Europe, not so much. Fractional and charter, I mean, if you're not feeling it, well, I'm sure you are. Some of the bigger players in Canada, I know many of you, and even some of the smaller players. Charter and fractional demand has been up strongly in some cases, well above even 2019 levels. That's in terms of flight hours or cycles, whatever, however you want to measure it. And the question here, this is the owner-operator community, some of whom operate these types of aircraft in fractional programs or charter, or rely on charter as a supplemental lift or whatever, or for occasional lift. Blue means yes. I believe that this is going to continue. Again, if you're planning for fuel pumping or SAF delivery, or if you're planning on selling airplanes or building that next hangar, do it, and make sure you secure your long-term leases. Airplanes need airports, and they aren't being built anymore very often. So demand for airport property, you start looking at, you can make whatever conclusion you want to. We're very bullish on this business. Flying with sustainable aviation fuels, SAF, this is coming. I mean, it's coming slowly. The economics aren't necessarily there yet to entice everybody, but frankly, leadership isn't about discounts, for stuff like this. This is important. This is part of our industry's impact, and hopefully reduced impact as we get and look at a greener future. SAF is a big part of that. There's other things, engines of the future, aerodynamic efficiency, electrics and hybrids, and all these other things that are coming. But short term, SAF is very important to business aviation's image, recovery, impact, and just about everything you can think of. And it's, given that fuel isn't the biggest part of the operating cost, it shows leadership, I think, to have SAF on the mind and in the tanks, in the wings. When we ask the owner operators in Canada, what is the next airplane that they're thinking of buying? If you remember earlier, we saw that big pyramid with a lot of aircraft at the lower end and maybe fewer at the top. Look at this. These are the large cabin. Red is light jet, mid-sized jet, large jet. You look at some of these numbers. This is the one aircraft they're thinking of buying next. Look at the brands that they're thinking of buying next. Bombardier shows up very well at around 22% in the last year or so. Textron Aviation, that's Citation, King Air, etc., also doing well. Very interesting, and you can look at, and we can do a lot of analytics on this. Please, if the border is open, if you feel free and able to come across the border, come to JFK Airport, fly in, fly out. We're hosting a leadership summit on September 15th and 16th.
Perfect. Thanks, Rollie. Really appreciate that. And I thought to start first with the time that we have, let's call it till 12:15 here. I wanted to go first to what the members have said, some comments. So Scotty Harold appreciates the time and efforts for on behalf of the association. Leo Knappen of Bombardier made an interesting observation about based aircraft in the territories versus some of our provinces in Atlantic Canada as an example. Ian Darnley made a comment about the shout out to SunWest in your photo. So how perfect for that. A question that came from Isabel, a new director actually appointed today, specifically any insight to share on the average selling price of pre-owned fleet year over year?
Mm. I think pricing is really the key. We're seeing finally stabilization of pricing. I'm not sure we're seeing inflation of pre-owned pricing, except for perhaps year 0 to 5 airplanes, delivered just very recently. I was looking at some of the inventory for sale. Let's say pick a model, a Global or a late model Gulfstream. There's maybe one aircraft in the market right now, if you're very specific about your requirements. So that you're going to see price inflation probably there. But in terms of the overall market, we're still seeing, I think, stabilization is the best word I would use to describe it. Typically, we would expect, as the fleet ages, you get a little bit of deflation, or at least, removal or diminution of value. But I think we're seeing stabilization of values.
Great. And let's move a little bit to the idea of luxury tax. It was interesting to me when I looked through some of the graphs. You've seen us on the association responding, in this case, to the Canadian government in the budget proposal around luxury tax. And I wanted to kind of get your perspective. I mean, looking at those deliveries from 18 and 19, we saw a sharp increase in terms of aircraft deliveries in Canada. And then, of course, COVID occurs. But perhaps you could share some insight into what you view as the impact of luxury tax on a Canadian buyer of a business aircraft. Perhaps your view of what that could do to the industry here in Canada and potentially across the globe.
Yeah, this is the bane of most CBAAs of the world, if we talk with them. Clearly there's a challenge there. I mean, you see it in some countries. China has got something similar. They have a luxury tax on imported aircraft. I mean, our industry has a public image, which I think is going to be, and it's already improving. I think that's the key. And that's why Anthony and his team are on board and so focused on these things. The image of our industry on Main Street, on Bay Street, in the halls of Ottawa. I mean, it has to be, and it can never be avoided. It has to be improved. It has to be constantly a focus. Why? Because stuff like this comes sometimes out of left field.
Fantastic, Rollie. And on that note, perhaps we'll close there. I know that we'll make available a recording of your presentation that will include also the contact information. So if any attendee wants to reach out on a point or get some clarification, they can reach out. But I wanted to, as we close this session, I wanted to thank you and continue this longstanding tradition of thanking all of our speakers today by donating to Hope Air Adopt a Flight program in your names. And we'll begin with you, Rollie. Rollie, again, we thank you and all the presenters for joining us today and for helping to raise funds to provide free travel and accommodations for Canadians in financial need who must access medical care far from home. So a flight from North Bay to Toronto for Jennifer, traveling for a brain injury, has been adopted in your name, Rollie. We will send you this following our presentation. So I wanted to thank you and our presenters again.